The title of today's message is Who is Jesus Christ? Who is Jesus Christ? We know who Jesus Christ is, but we are going to come to some logical conclusions based on the Bible, but logical conclusions about who Jesus Christ is, because the Bible is a very logical book. So very often I've felt the Bible is not logical, but the Bible is a very logical book. So this is called textual criticism. In textual criticism, what you do is we restore texts nearly as possible to their original form. Restoring texts nearly as close as possible to the original form. So based on textual criticism, we can come to these very logical conclusions about Jesus Christ. Now, one thing that Muslims keep saying is that the Bible has been translated so many times that you've lost the original languages and all that. But the Quran has not been translated, so we have the original. And that's something that Muslims often say. But based on textual criticism, we can actually prove that however many times the Bible has been translated, or it has been printed or written or rewritten, we can go back to the original text. And the more translations we have, the more accuracy we get. The more translations we have, the more accuracy we get. Because we can see which is the most prominent. We can find which is the most common. And we can decide based on that. Okay. Now, first of all, we're going to look at whether there's any historical or non-biblical evidence about Jesus. Non-biblical evidence. Because, in a Russian communist dictionary, this is what it said, that Jesus is a mythical figure that never existed. This is a Russian communist dictionary. Jesus is a mythical figure that never existed. Now, there are many narratives. Different people say different things, but this is something that a lot of people read and accept as the truth. But the fact is, there is a lot of evidence about Jesus from Roman historians. They're called Tacitus and Suetonius. Both of them have written about Jesus. Tacitus and Suetonius. And more importantly, we have a Jewish historian whose name is Josephus. We're all familiar with Josephus. He's a Jewish historian. But remember, he is not a Christian historian, he's a Jewish historian. So he's not someone who was looking forward to the arrival of Jesus. As far as he's concerned, Jesus is an impostor. But we have a lot of writings from Josephus. And he also tells us that there was a wise man called Jesus. He did wonderful works, and he rose from the dead. He's mentioned all that. Anyhow, so now to come to our point that we're looking at textual criticism from the Bible to prove that Jesus is God. Jesus is who he says he is. Now, the entire Bible is about Jesus. No doubt about that. But I just want to ask you, in the Garden of Eden, do we see Jesus? Anybody? In the Garden of Eden.
The tree of life.
The tree of life. And, God created everything. But actually, when Adam and Eve sinned, and they realized that they were naked, right? And they were hiding from God, right? And God gives them clothes to wear. He gives them animal skins.
Yeah.
And where did the animal skin come from? Because God killed a lamb. God killed a lamb. So even in the Garden of Eden, forgiveness
Yes.
was through sacrifice. Forgiveness was through Jesus,
Yeah.
who came much, much, much later. But even in the Garden of Eden, Jesus was there because God had to kill a lamb to atone for their sacrifice. And He gave them animal skins to wear as clothes. That was after killing the lamb. So even in the Garden of Eden, so in the book of Revelation, of course, we know, but even in the Garden of Eden, Jesus was there. Jesus was there. The sacrifice that Jesus made was there. All right. So the whole Bible is about Jesus. And okay. And so, contrary to popular opinion, as I mentioned this before, the higher the number of translations, the greater the accuracy. So, the higher the number of translations and the reprintings, the greater the accuracy. So we're going to look at that. Now, first of all, we're going to compare the New Testament to other ancient writings. We don't have many ancient writings because in those days, writing was a very laborious, painstaking process. But we do have a couple of books. One is Caesar's Gallic Wars, the wars that Julius Caesar fought. So Caesar's Gallic Wars, we only have 9 or 10 copies of them. Original, we're talking about original copies written on parchment, not on paper, written on parchment, on leather skin. So we have 9 or 10 copies, and the oldest was written some 900 years after Caesar's day. The oldest one we have was written 900 years after Caesar. And then we have Livy's Roman History. Again, another book by another Roman historian. And we have around 20 copies, and the earliest of which comes from around 980. Again, 20 copies, around 900 years gap between the what they talked about and the time it was written down. But when it comes to the New Testament, we have a great wealth of material. The New Testament was written between 40 and 100 AD, and we have excellent full manuscripts of the whole New Testament dating from as early as 350 AD. So just look at that. All the other books that we have, 900 years gap. But the New Testament, we have New Testament versions that are just 350, written in 350 AD. That is just 350 years after Christ.
Before that, 350 AD
Yeah.
onwards or
Yeah, 350 AD. That's what we have for the New Testament. For the New Testament, and we also have a fragment of John's Gospel from 130 AD. A fragment of John's Gospel from 130 AD, just 130 years after the event. But all the others are 350 AD. But compared to other writings like Roman historians, it's a 900-year gap, right? But this is so much closer, so much closer. And we have around 5,000 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and 9,300 other manuscripts, as well as 36,000 books cited in writings about the early church fathers. So we have a whole wealth of information when it comes to the Bible, a whole wealth of information. So Sir Frederick Keaton, he's a leading scholar in this area. He says the interval then between the dates of original composition and the earliest extant evidence becomes so small as to be negligible. So the distance between the date of printing and the actual event is so small. 350 years is nothing. The closest other book is 900 years. This is just 350 years for the whole Bible. So we can be absolutely sure that the Bible is the original. What we have is the original, because we have copies from that early on. So we can compare any Bible we take, we can compare it to a book that was written in 350 AD. Just imagine. So we can get that accurate. So when you look at writing, this is almost negligible. This time period is so small that it's almost negligible. Okay, so we know that Jesus existed, right? Jesus existed. Now, who exactly is Jesus? Who exactly is he? Because a lot of people say that he was a great religious leader, right? He was a great man, he was a great religious leader. But what evidence is there to suggest that Jesus was more than a wonderful man, more than a great leader? What evidence is there for that? That he was the Son of God and the third person of the Trinity. What evidence do we have for that? Okay, we're going to look at what did Jesus say about himself. That's what we're going to do. What did he say about himself? And some people say that, Jesus never claimed to be God. That's another thing that people keep saying. Jesus never said, I am God, worship me. He never did that, right? He never did that. Yet, when one looks at all that he taught and the claims he made, there is little doubt that he was conscious of being a man whose identity was God. I love this sentence, right? So when you look at what he said and how he said it, you become conscious of the fact that he was a man whose identity was God. His identity was the identity of God. And another thing about Jesus is his teachings centered on himself. Jesus talked of himself as being the answer. He didn't point to somebody else like other teachers, always pointing to somebody else. Jesus said, I am the way. I am the way. So one of the fascinating things about Jesus is that so much of his teaching centered on himself. Centered on himself. So what he was saying was, if you want to have a relationship with God, you need to come to me. That's what he was saying. If you want to know God, come to me. That's what he was saying. That's what he was saying. So it is only through a relationship with him that we can encounter God, which is also true, which is literally true, right? Because unless he had paid the price on the cross, we would never be able to enter the presence of God. That is literally true. Literally true in every sense of the word. So that's what he was saying. Come to me, and I am the way. I am the way to take you to God. Now, all of us are aware of, an internal dissatisfaction that we experience when we don't know God. And psychologists have attempted to analyze this. Why is humanity dissatisfied? What is the problem? And various scientists and psychologists, and they've come up with so many definitions, like Freud. Freud said people are hungry for love. They're hungry for love. Everybody wants love. Jung said people are hungry for security. And Adler said people are hungry for significance. All these, there is Joyce Meyer, I like what Joyce Meyer said. I've repeated it many times. Joyce Meyer said that, she said it in everyday terms, She didn't come up with any big words. She just said that all of us have a God-shaped hole on the inside. All of us have a God-shaped hole. She's not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anything. She said all of us have a God-shaped hole on the inside. Meaning only God can fill that hole. God is the only one who can fill that hole. And for anyone who is struggling with life, what did Jesus say? I am the bread of life. And to those who stumble and fall, what did Jesus say? I am the light of the world. And to those who are face to face with death, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. You know, and the author of this is actually an amateur fisherman. And one would think that a fisherman is not, he doesn't face death on a daily basis. But this particular fisherman has faced death very often, because when he's fishing, this was especially after the war was over, and he would cast these nets into the ocean and pull the nets onto the boat. And very often what was caught in his net would be a mine. You want to know what a mine is? A mine is a bomb that is lying unexploded at the bottom of the sea. And so even as a fisherman, I've been face to face with death on many occasions, because you're pulling up your net and your net is heavy and you think, oh, I've got a good catch, and you dump everything on the deck of the boat and you see this mine rolling around from side to side, and if it explodes, everything is over. There are old unexploded mines left over from the war days, because in order to sink ships, this is what every country did. They used to drop mines into the water, and most of these mines, they have not exploded and they have just settled to the bottom of the seabed, and he pulls these mines up in his fishing net. And so even as a fisherman, I have faced death so often because of these mines. So all of us, if we live our lives, we will be conscious of death, that our lives are temporary and our lives are fragile. We will be conscious of that. And what did Jesus say? He who believes in me, even though he dies, he will live even though he dies. Again, this is what Jesus said. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives in me will never die. So even if he will live even though he dies, and he who lives in me will never die. These are all statements Jesus made. So to come back to this point, that everything Jesus said centered on himself. Everything was about himself. This is the place. This is where you need to come to. This is what he kept on saying. He pointed to himself as the answer to the missing piece in life. Not anyone else. Not anyone else. I am the way. That's what he said. So he did not give a set of rules or a philosophy to live by. He told people, come to me. I am the answer. I am the way. I am the answer. And many people suffer from addictions, and Jesus said, if the Son sets you free, you shall be free indeed. Right? That's what Jesus said. And many of us are burdened with worries and with fears and with guilt. And Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So, in Matthew 10:40, he says, to receive him was to receive God. That's what he said, if you receive me, you receive God. That's Matthew 10:40. And to welcome him was to welcome God. Mark 9:37. And to have seen him was to have seen God. John 14:9. So he didn't say I am God, but he said all these things. So he is a man who spoke with the identity of God. He's a man who spoke with the identity of God. And he made many direct claims. He made many straight, direct claims. First of all, one claim that he made was to be the Messiah or the Christ. He didn't say that I am God, but he did say I am the Messiah. I am the Christ. We know that, in John 20:26-29, we have Thomas who does not believe, right? He's the disciple who does not believe. And Jesus allows him to see his hand and put his finger and everything. And then when he believes, Jesus says to him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So the real blessing is for those who have not seen and yet have believed. So this was one claim. And then he also claimed to be God the Son, in Mark 14, 61 to 64. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right side of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. This is what he said. I am the Son. I am the Son. I am the Messiah. He said all these things. And the high priest tore his clothes and he says, why do we need any more witnesses? We have heard blasphemy, and they condemned him to death. So, and if you have only one opportunity to take a person to one passage of scripture, you know which passage it should be. It should be John 10, 30 to 33. John 10, 30 to 33. Because what does he say there? He says, I and the Father are one. I and the Father are one. And again, the Jews picked up stones to stone him. But Jesus said to them, I have shown you many great miracles from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? For which of these miracles do you stone me? And the Jews said, we are not stoning you for any of these, replied the Jews, but for the blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. So, I am the Messiah, I am the Son, I and the Father are one. He has said all these things. And, claims like this need to be tested. We should be able to test these claims. Because all sorts of people can make all sorts of claims. All sorts of people can make all sorts of claims. So, how do we test what Jesus said? Again, looking at the Bible. How can we test this claim that Jesus was the unique Son of God? Now, there are three logical possibilities. When somebody makes these outrageous claims, there are three possibilities. Either they were untrue and he knew it. Either these are lies and he knows it, in which case he's an imposter. Or he didn't know it, in which case he's crazy. And the third is, what he's saying is the truth. There are only three possibilities here. First is, he's lying and he knows he's lying. That means he's an imposter. The second is, he makes these claims, but he's crazy. He doesn't, they're lies. He's crazy. That's the second imposter, the second possibility. And the third possibility is that whatever he's saying is true. There's no other way to look at them. So C.S. Lewis says it like this: a man who was merely a man, who said the sort of things Jesus said, would not be a great moral teacher. A lot of people describe Jesus say that Jesus is a great moral teacher. But C.S. Lewis says, no, a man who made these claims would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic or a liar, or he would be a devil out of hell. So if a man makes these claims, he has to be a lunatic or a liar or a devil out of hell. So we have to make our choice. Either he is the Son of God, or else he's a madman, or else he's a crazy man. There are no other options here. So these are direct claims that he made. And he also made a lot of indirect claims. Like what? Again, they show us that he had the identity of God. And so he did not say he was God, but he had the identity of God. So what are the indirect claims that he made? He claimed to have the authority to forgive sins, right? That's a claim that he made. He had the authority to forgive sins. And and we know how, when he heals that paralyzed man, he says to him, Jesus knew in their spirit what they were thinking, and he said to them, why do you think these things? Which is easier to say to this paralyzed man, your sins are forgiven, or say, get up and take your mat and walk? So, Jesus, he's sort of healing the man and telling him his sins are forgiven. They're both done in more or less the same breath. And he says, which is easier? I did it like this because I have the authority to forgive sins. I have the authority to forgive it. I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So that's why he said to this man, take up your mat and go home. Now this is an astonishing claim. Again, C.S. Lewis, in his book, he says, now this is an astonishing claim to make, that to have the ability to forgive sins. Now this is because unless the speaker is God himself, this is a preposterous, comic claim. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Now, because between us, I step on your toe, you forgive me. I take your money, you forgive me, right? Or you take something of mine, I forgive you. We can understand that, right? We can understand. Between you and me, hurting and forgiving is something that we can all understand. But here is a guy who says that all the sins in the world, I forgive him. I forgive him. He doesn't know what's happening between people, how someone has hurt someone, or he's not connected to any of these. He's saying that I forgive all sins. A universal forgiveness. And this is what Jesus did, right? He told people that their sins were forgiven, and he never waited to consult the other people who their sins had injured. When he tells someone, I forgive you, at least he should consult the person who was hurt, right? Who was injured. No, he doesn't do that. He says, I forgive all your sins. So what do we need to understand from that? Because what we need to understand is that he unhesitatingly behaved as if he was the one chiefly offended. He was the one chiefly offended, and he was the one chiefly injured. So this is between me and another person. But above all that, when I do something wrong, when I hurt my brother, I am hurting Jesus first. I'm offending. I am hurting Jesus first. Why is that? Because remember, we are primarily a spirit. We are primarily a spirit, and whatever we do, the first action is in the spirit world. What happens here is in the physical world, right? It is the world of the body and the soul, right? And we think we might be doing something in this world, but the first impact is always in the spiritual world, because He is the creator, and we are spiritual beings. Our body and our mind and our soul, all that comes later. We are a spirit. So that is why He can say, I forgive you. Because whatever we do or say, the first impact is there. The first impact is in the spirit, against the Spirit of God. That is the first impact. And that is why He can say, I can, I do forgive you. And here his indirect claims. He had the authority to forgive sins. Yeah. And so this ability to forgive sins, it only makes sense if we can understand that the first law that we broke when we hurt someone is God's law. And He is the first one who was offended. It only makes sense if we can think like that. Otherwise, how on earth can Jesus forgive my sin when I hurt somebody else? Because it is His law that I broke. It is His love that is wounded. That is the only way this makes sense. It's the only way it makes sense. So in the mouth of any speaker who is not God, these words would be ridiculous. They have no meaning at all, right? Ridiculous. But only God. It only makes sense if God says that, I forgive you. And another extraordinary claim that Jesus made was to be the judge of the world, right? That's also another extraordinary claim that He made. I am the judge of the world. Remember, where is He living? He is living in a tiny little country that has been conquered by the Romans, right? They have no political freedom. They have nothing. And this one man is standing there and saying, I am the judge of the entire world. That's another extraordinary claim that He made. And that He would return and sit on His throne in heavenly glory. One day He would return on His throne in His glory. Because His first trip to earth, the purpose of it was not to judge, it was to save. He came to save us. That is why He came in the lowest imaginable way. And He suffered the most terrible punishment of crucifixion on the cross. Because He came to save us. He came to pay the price of our punishment. And He is saying that I will come as a judge. I will come as a judge. And all the nations would be gathered before Him, and He would pass judgment on them all. Some would receive an inheritance prepared for them since the creation of the world and eternal life, but others would suffer the punishment of being separated from Him forever. This is what He was talking about the future. This is what would happen in the future. And the two extraordinary claims that He made, right? The two extraordinary claims that He made. To judge the world and the authority to forgive sins. And now, what is the evidence that there is to support such claims? What is the evidence? How can He make these outrageous claims? But what is the evidence that we have when we look at the Bible? The evidence, His teaching. His teaching is the evidence, because the teachings of Jesus is acknowledged to be the most significant teaching that has ever fallen on anyone's lips. Fallen from anyone's lips. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love your enemies. Turn the other cheek. This is what He told us to do, right? This is what He told us to do. So the most significant teaching that has ever fallen from anyone's cheek. Nobody has ever taught like this. Nobody has ever taught like this. And Bernard Ram, an American professor of theology, says this about the teachings. He says, the teachings of Jesus, they are read more, quoted more, loved more, believed more, and translated more, because they are the greatest words ever spoken. Just look at them. They are quoted more, loved more, believed more, translated more, because they are the greatest words ever spoken. Their greatness lies in the pure, lucid spirituality, in dealing definitely and authoritatively with the greatest problem that throbbed in the human breast. So he can deal with the problems of the human heart. So no other words have the appeal of Jesus' words, because no other man can answer these fundamental questions as Jesus answered them. No one can answer our questions the way Jesus answered them. So that is why only God can answer those questions the way Jesus answered them. No human being could ever answer those questions the way Jesus answered them. Only God could give us such an answer. So such teachings could never come from a trickster or a madman. They could never ever come that way. Okay, so we will start.